Dr. Shanternal, thank you very much for your time. It's a great honor to have you on our program. So first of all, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, well, my name is Sean Turnell, and up until a few years ago, I was a professor in economics in Australia. But in 2016, I came over here since then and living up here in Naypyidaw.
So I would like to dive straight into what's been unfolding on the Western Front with the Rakhine crisis. So what's your opinion?
Yeah, indeed. Well, and as you identified, the first thing to say is that the Rakhine crisis has been a tragedy, and that there have been perpetrators behind that, and they ultimately need to be brought to justice. But around this issue too has been a profound lack of understanding of the complexity of the issue, and I think verging at times on fake news, as you mentioned. I've been very critical, observing here from Naypyidaw, of particularly the international press reaction. I think there have been many vested interests within the international press and elsewhere at seeing the situation in very stark and unrealistic terms, very black and white terms. And it's meant that I think the coverage has in large part been incredibly counterproductive.
A lot of people tend to believe what is being said in the media.
And I think the biggest single problem here is a willful lack of understanding of the role of the civilian government. I think for many people outside, the cheap and sexy story has been the idea of a new government seeking democracy, led by a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, being associated with violence, and we see the word genocide and so on thrown around. When you think about it, that's a clickbait story. That's something that people pay attention to. It's a much sexier story. The real tragedy of that, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's undermined the very real efforts to try and bring a solution to Rakhine and try to bring peace.
Yeah. So talking about vested interests, the people who are behind it, the entities that are behind it, what sort of benefit do they get driving this?
There are quite a lot of people, both within Myanmar and outside of it, that would like to see this experiment in democracy fail. A lot of the vested interests in politics, in the security apparatus, in economics, and in doing that, whenever you're a reformist government, you run into an enemy. So in many ways, I think many of us on the reformist wing, if you like, of the civilian government, we always expected something, some pushback, and Rakhine has succeeded very greatly to that end, because while the civilian government has tried to stay on track in the economic sphere, particularly they have, but nonetheless Rakhine has been, I think, a major effort to derail that process. And again, in other ways, I think it's succeeded, and certainly internationally, the brand, if you like, of Myanmar has been really damaged by what has taken place and the reaction to it. So I think it is important to identify that, again, there are interests in this country as well as outside who want to see this new experiment in democracy in a country that has been ridden by conflict and oppression for 60 years, wanting to see that fail.
Perhaps, you can touch on the various complexities, because complexities is one of the things they talk about.
Yeah, certainly I think the complexities are everywhere around this issue. There are domestic complexities to do with great historical rights and wrongs in Rakhine State and other places. There are the complexities I mentioned earlier about vested interests in the economy who want to see the reform effort fail. Internationally, there are extraordinary complexities. The whole Rakhine issue is caught up in geopolitics. It's caught up in things like, I think, identity politics. It's caught up with the great struggles between civilizational groups, if you like, around the world. And so, yeah, it's a deeply complex story, but it's not allowed, that complexity doesn't seem to get across, and therefore the solutions that, need to be complex themselves in dealing with a situation that is not as black and white as people think, sometimes gets lost.
Yeah, there is a lot of criticism against Aung San Suu Kyi, for example, about her keeping silent.
Yep.
So what's your opinion there?
Yeah, sometimes a lie, if repeated enough, becomes a truth. One of the most central in this whole drama, I think, has been the idea that Aung San Suu Kyi has not spoken out. It's just simply not true. I mean, she's spoken out again and again against the violence in Rakhine State and other conflicts in Myanmar and said that this is completely unacceptable, that somehow she's not speaking up has become sort of part of the established myth, I think, around Rakhine. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that the civilian government has been trying to do a great many things to try and solve the situation of the violence in Rakhine and other places as well. Very specifically in terms of, the actual violence that's taking place in the immediate sense, but then longer term, trying to chip away through reform of Myanmar's political economy against this entire state apparatus that again for 50 to 60 years has used oppression and violence to keep the people of Myanmar under control. But by trying to chip away at that, by going deep into the political economy, trying to open things up, open Myanmar up to the world, they're actually trying to bring about the sort of peaceful institutional framework that the country needs. So in really profound ways, Dorsu and the civilian government more broadly is really trying to come up with solutions to this very intractable problem.